Good morning.
So good morning. Let me get up to lunch.
Ben, is that shirt from the deli?
Yes.
Is it?
Yes, it is.
Can you wear that shirt on a fast day?
I only wore it because it's a very heavy shirt.
So the question is, what's the fast day today?
That's a good question.
The
Tenth of
fast.
Tevet.
What's that?
The 10th of Tevet.
The 10th of Tevet, right?
So that explains
everything.
everything.
That explains everything.
We were wondering if that includes coffee.
Yeah. So there are 3 minor fast days that are linked to the destruction of the temple. The 10th of Tevet, the Shvar Asar B'Tammuz, the 27th of Tammuz, and the 17th of Tammuz, and the Tisha B'Av is the major fast, right? And the that's it. There you go. Well, Tzum Gedalia is a different one, right? But those 2, right? This is the Asar B'Tevet is the beginning of the siege around Jerusalem. Right? So the Romans came, they laid siege. The Greeks. The Greeks came, they laid siege to the Babylonians. Babylonians laid siege around the city, and then that starts now. And then on Shvar Asar B'Tammuz, the 17th of Tammuz, is when they breach the walls of the city. And then Tisha B'Av, which is then a major fast day, is when the destruction of the temple happens. And so those are fast days connected to the destruction of the temple. There's also a minor, so what makes something a minor fast day versus one of the major fast days? The major fast days, there's just 2 of them, right? Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur. And those are fast days where we fast the whole day, from sundown one night till dark the next night, right? Same as what we would do for Shabbat. Whereas the minor fast days are sunrise to sundown, and so, or to dark. And so those are more similar to the way the Muslims would do Ramadan, right? You could, you fast during daylight hours, and then at night you can eat. So for people who got up at, 4:30 this morning, 5 o'clock this morning, right? You could eat, right? Not a problem, even though it's already the 10th of Tevet. Right? 10th of Tevet started last night at sundown. But you could eat in the morning, and then just fast day till dark. Some people will break these minor fasts, and even Tisha B'Av. Some people break these fasts after Mincha, right? So after midday, basically, and seeing them as more of a minor holiday, minor fast days. The other thing about this is what was also brought up was about the Tzum Gedalia is another minor fast day. That's right the day after Rosh Hashanah. So that's more about you've eaten too much for 2 days and now you need a little bit. No, it's not. That is Tzum Gedalia is about the time where after the Babylonians came in, they instituted a governor, a Jewish governor over the state, right? Sort of what they would do is they would put somebody in, as they were taking peoples over, right? Control of different areas, they would put into power somebody that they picked, right? But from the population, so in our case, from the Jewish population, to rule over the area, and mostly, more than anything else than to collect taxes and things like that. And so Gedalia was the person who was put into place, and he was killed by other Jews, right? So this is an instance of Jews killing other Jews, and it's something that in modern times speaks to some people after the assassination of Rabin, right? And so some people have started observing that fast a little bit more because of that connection to one Jew killing another Jew, and certainly a person in a leadership position, right? And then there's also the fast of Esther, which is a minor fast, so also sun up to sundown. If you were to fast for the fast of the firstborn, that would also be a minor fast, but most people that are concerned about fasting for that find a way to make it to a siyum, which is a completion of study in the morning, so that then it's usually done by the rabbi, although it doesn't have to be, finishes a piece of study, throws a little celebration in honor of completing that, and then everybody's invited to eat, right? And that overweighs the mitzvah to eat, overweighs the mitzvah of fasting, and so you go ahead and you eat, and then you can eat the rest of the day. So most people that, again, if you're a firstborn and you're concerned about fasting on that day, most people try and make it to a siyum. And there was just a big siyum this past week. I'm sure people saw in the news, right? The siyum hashas, the completion of the cycle of studying the Talmud, 7.5 years roughly, at a page a day, to read through to learn through the Talmud. Huge celebration in New York. Which stadium was it? I don't know. They sold out some stadium. MetLife Stadium, and 80,000 people or so.
I read
90,000 people, whatever.
Wow.
What is this?
This was on Sunday. They had the celebration, so mostly there are people from the Orthodox communities. But I have plenty of friends that had done it as well. And you basically you learn the Talmud, one page every day, and it's like a shelf of encyclopedias, right? If you were to sit down with the encyclopedia and read a page a day, it takes you 7 years or so, and it covers everything in Jewish life that you could possibly want. And it's not about going in depth to it, but just getting sort of that overview and that experience of going through it.
And it's all in Hebrew, isn't it?
Well, the Talmud itself is Hebrew and Aramaic.
But it's not in English.
But you can find it in English.
Can you find it?
Oh yeah, there's a number of translations now that you can find.
Did some of the people do the 7?
I'm sure that there's a good number of them that did it with translation. Yeah. Now, some people go to a study class, so you'll find certainly in Orthodox communities every day, right, where they learn with a group, and it's really probably just one person, really just mostly reading through it and not necessarily explaining a whole lot. But then others where you might say, okay, well, somebody who's learned it could pick out a couple of key things on each page or whatever. So it's a lot of differences as to what does it mean to do a page a day. Are you really reading it, or are you finding something to focus on? There's lots of different ways to do it, but it's sort of a global experience, right, to do that. So they're started back over again. So if you want, we're not, I'm not doing it. People are on page 4 now, and starting back over. Whoever wants.
What was the Steinsaltz?
Steinsaltz has a translation of the Talmud. A couple of them. It started one a while back, and now there's one it's a really nice page of the Hebrew, the English together. There's also the Koren is another publisher that's put out an English translation. We call it the Art Scroll is another one. So there's a number of different Englishes out there.
We started with the Steinsaltz, but apparently he died after just doing a few.
I don't know that he didn't make it through the whole thing, right? But the Koran is out now, and it's really a nice publication. I've got 2 volumes of it or so, but it's got the standard text, and then it's got English stuff around it explaining all the different parts. So yeah. That's a siyum as well. Wonderful. Here we go into the last parsha of Genesis, of Vaychi, Parshat Vaychi. page 293. Some of these this way. Oh, Ralph and Kitty didn't stay.
They had important shopping to do.
Okay, there you go. If she was here, I thought they were definitely staying.
Yeah, they're going to Israel soon. And she has a list of things she has to bring to Israel.
Gotcha. So here we're nearing the end of the story of our ancestors, of the patriarchs and the matriarchs. And Joseph has found his way down to Egypt. The brothers come down looking for food. And in last week's Parsha, Jacob joins them. Right? The father comes down, and the whole family now is in Egypt to wrap up this section before we get into, of course, Exodus with the response to the slavery. George, you want to start us off? 293.
Jacob lived 17 years in the land of Egypt, so that the span of Jacob's life came to 147 years. When the time approached for Israel to die, he summoned his son Joseph and said to him, "Do me this favor, place your hand under my thigh as a pledge of your steadfast loyalty. Please do not bury me in Egypt. When I lie down with my father, take me up from Egypt and bury me in their burial place." He replied, "I will do as you have spoken." And he said, "Swear to me." And he swore to him. Then Israel bowed at the head of the bed.
Okay, so here, this interaction between Jacob and Joseph, again, sort of bringing up the point or the idea of Joseph being his favorite, right? You'd think that if a father was going to, especially at this time, a father was going to be giving instructions over what to do after he passes, it would be to the oldest. And here it's not, right? It's to Joseph. And we could say, well, one, we know Joseph was his favorite, but also that Joseph had a position of power in Egypt. He's the person who could carry this out in a way that the other brothers wouldn't have been able to do, to bring him back to Canaan. On the handout, we have a few sources about this beginning section. Vaychi Yaakov, and Jacob lived. Len, you want to read that?
And Jacob lived. Why is this section totally closed? Because compromising as it does an account of the death of Jacob, as soon as our father Jacob departed this life, the hearts and eyes of Israel were closed, their eyes became dim and their hearts troubled, because of the misery of the bondage which they then began to impose upon them. Another reason is because he, Jacob, wished to reveal to his sons the date of the end of days, in other words, when Israel's exile would finally end, but the vision was closed, concealed from him.
Right, so this saying this section is closed. If you look at the end of the parsha before, there's no, on 289, there's no letter, right, at the end of the parsha, right? So it ends by Yeshiv Israel Be'eretz Mitzrayim Be'eretz Goshen V'yachazu v'yifru v'yirbu me'od. And then sometimes there's a little letter next to that. If you go back now where we are on 293, look at the end of the paragraph that George read, there's a pay, right? See that pay there?
Yep.
Sometimes, if you look on the page before, now this is Haftarah, but it's the same idea, there's a samech, right? The samech means sagur, and the pay means patuach. What does that mean? This is something that helps Ben in his Torah reading. Satum means closed, and patuach means open. And what it means is that as the scribe is writing it, right, when he gets to Hamitah, the last word, it's open for the rest of the line. That's what the pay is here, right? A little pay in the page. The rest of the line is open. with the Samech Satum, it means skip a certain number of spaces. I don't know how many it is, 10 spaces or so, and then start back up again. So there's this closed blank space in the middle of the line, right? But it's not till the end of the line. It's just it's a gap in the middle of the line before going on. So what this is saying here is, why is this section totally closed? What it means is it doesn't start off with a little break. Almost every parsha, right, has a little break beforehand, right? Whether it's the whole line open or whether it's, you know, in the middle of the line. Very rarely does it flow directly, right, without a little break in the line from the parsha before to this parsha. So Rashi's picking up on this and saying, well, why is that, right? Why in this case is it closed? What can we learn from that? And of course, this is very homiletical and all, finding meaning in something that maybe you wouldn't necessarily find meaning. I don't know if I've shared it before, in rabbinical school, sometimes we would sit around, us, you know, nerdy rabbis, and we would play, you know, what we call the drosh game, right? And somebody would say, how come they made this room with 4 doors on the cabinets? And then somebody say, oh, 4 doors. Well, 4 is a very important number in Judaism, right? It's like the imahot, the matriarchs, right? And they go on and give some sort of a drash about the fact that there's 4 doors here. So Rashi's basically doing the same thing, right? He's saying, how come this is closed? I'm gonna give you some homiletical understanding of it. And there's 2, really, that he gives here, right? As soon as our father departed, this life, the hearts and eyes of Israel were closed, right? So there's this closed sense there. And the other is that, when it says another reason, is that Jacob wanted to tell his children what's going to happen, either when it says the end of days, either at the end of the period of slavery, or maybe we're talking about Olam Haba, right? The end, really the end of days, the world to come. But at this moment, I mean, he had knowledge of that, but at this moment then, that vision was closed from him, was concealed from him, was because not wanting him to, you know, spill the beans, if you will, right? So Rashi's finding that meaning in this little section. Okay, Chizkuni has another thought on it. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt. Go ahead, Len.
Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt. All the years of Yaakov until he settled in Egypt could not truly be described as high in life, seeing that they were all clouded by different kinds of anguish. It was only during his last 17 years in Egypt that his mind was at rest and not beset by serious worries of one kind or another. In fact, this whole verse has been inserted in the Torah as a compliment to Joseph, who was the cause of Yaakov's last 17 years being happy years. During those 17 years, he repaid his father, who had sustained him for the first 17 years of his life, by providing for him during the last 17 years of his life. He had been 17 years old when he had been sold.
As we see this parallel, again, maybe we're reading into something, right? But we see 17 here, and we knew that Joseph was sold into slavery when he was 17. So how can we come up with some learning from that? That those were the happy years of Jacob's life, and not only, you know, is there that parallel, but just as basically Jacob took care of Joseph in the first 17, now Joseph is repaying him, and in some ways, you know, we get some ideas of kibud av v'em, right? The respect to show to your father and mother. When the rabbis talk about that in the Talmud, they talk about how you show some of that respect when you take care of a parent as they end the end of their life. Right? So here's that turnaround, this chayim, this life of Jacob is now coming to a close, and it's, you know, he was able to enjoy those last years because he was reunited with Joseph. Let's see, we've got, I think, one more of them here. You want to read that next section?
Yeah, name's Mara.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
We must remember that Jacob strove to attain a very high degree of sanctity, one which is reflected in his name, Israel. Spiritual highs are attainable only when one simultaneously frees oneself of such human concerns as pain, anguish, and anger, etc. The kind of sanctity Jacob strove for needed to be based on the attainment of a degree of serenity in his earthly life, something that we nowadays experience only on the Sabbath, a day that God has imbued with the quality of menucha. He gave us an additional soul in order to appreciate that day to the full, and in order to help us disregard all the depressing phenomena we have to deal with during the 6 days preceding the Sabbath. The reason we are able to do this is because the menucha emanates in the higher spiritual regions. This is why God himself called the Sabbath oneg delight. Okay, the Sabbath oneg delight. Whenever Jacob experienced the kind of spiritual serenity we are meant to experience every Shabbat, he qualified for the name Israel. The Torah therefore informs us about all these occasions by referring to him by his additional name. Whenever Jacob experienced worries, etc., this serenity departed from him, similar to the departure of the Neshama
Yetera.
Okay, fine. Neshama Yetera from every Jew at the end of Shabbat. At such times, the Torah reverts to referring to our patriarch as being merely Jacob. So is this the origin of the rabbinic idea of two souls?
So this is, I think that he's taking this from where the rabbinic idea comes from, but he's definitely using that idea. So we're seeing two different things here. One is when Abraham's name is changed and Sarah's name is changed, right? Avram to Abraham and Sarai to Sarah. It's never gone back to using the old name again. Whereas with Jacob, when his name gets changed to Yisrael, we see a lot of back and forth, right? Sometimes Yaakov and sometimes Yisrael. And it's sort of peculiar, right? If the blessing was, if we were to go back and look at it, it says, the angel says, no longer will you be called Yaakov, now your name is Yisrael. Well, but we call him Yaakov all the time, right? And the Torah calls him Yaakov still, and then certainly into Psalms and things like that. So the question is, why the different usage? And the Orach Chaim is saying that one way of breaking down, and I'm sure there's going to be exceptions to it, right? But one way of breaking it down is that when it's a time where he's comfortable and having a good life, then he's called Yisrael. And when he's in that time of pain or other distress, then he's referred back to as Jacob again. So that's one thing at play. The other is this idea of the Neshama Yetera. And so this idea that on Shabbat, we are given a second soul. And one way to think about that is that we're given the ability or maybe just the space to experience things in a more intense way. And so the idea, there's teachings about how things taste richer and more vibrant, and the colors and smells and all those types of things that we sense, we experience them in a stronger way on Shabbat than we do the rest of the way because of this extra soul. I think there's a third thing that's being brought out here too, and some of that is connected to how I think about the Unatan Tokef prayer on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, where it talks about who shall live and who shall die, right? When is Jacob really living, right? It's one thing that he's lived, all these years, but what part of it has he truly been alive, right? And we can think about that in our own lives as well. I mean, might be times where we feel like we're going through the motions of day after day after day, and then there's other times where we really feel like we're living life, right? And it's not about, I don't see that prayer as much about actual physical death, but more about our ways that we can bring about more spiritual life in our own lives, and I think that that's also a piece of what's going on here. So when it says, Vaychi Yaakov, and Jacob lived, It's really saying, these 17 years were a time where he was really alive, and not just with that sort of humdrum status, and also not the negativity of feeling like his that he had truly lost his son. I said a lot. Any thoughts?
The parallel is Chaya Sarah, I think.
Sure. Right, we have that with and a lot of as they're passing, right? They say that their life was so many years or whatever else, and we probably from each one of them we can find some different meanings. We know with Sarah, there's the midrash that because it breaks down the years. I know we've talked about it, but not everybody's here. It says she lived 127, right? And the question is, why does it say 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years as opposed to 127? And the answer is that when she was 100, she retained the beauty of a 20-year-old, and when she was 20, she retained the innocence of a 7-year-old. Right? Those types of teachings are there. So in some ways, right, some similar type of stuff. Great. Okay, back to the Chumash. Chapter 48 on page 294. George, you want to read us?
Sometime?
Yep.
Sometime afterward, Joseph was told, "Your father is ill." So he took with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. When Jacob was told, "Your son Joseph has come to see you," Israel summoned his strength and sat up in bed. And Jacob said to Joseph, "El Shaddai appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and he blessed me and said to me, 'I will make you fertile and numerous, making of you a community of peoples, and I will assign this land in your offspring to come for an everlasting possession.' Now your 2 sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I came to you in Egypt, shall be mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, no less than Reuben and Simeon. But progeny born to you after them shall be yours. They shall be recorded instead of their brothers in their inheritance. I do this because when I was returned from Padan, and Rachel died, to my sorrow, when I was journeying through the land of Canaan, when still some distance short of Ephrath, and I buried her there on the road to Ephrath, now Bethlehem." Noticing Joseph's son, Israel asked, "Who are these?" And Joseph said to his father, "They are my sons, whom God has given me here. Bring them up to me," he said, "and that I may bless them." Now Israel's eyes were dim with age. He could not see. So Joseph brought them close to him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see you again, and here God has let me see your children as well." Joseph then removed them from his knees and bowed low, with his face to the ground. Joseph took the 2 of them, Ephraim and his right hand to Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left hand to Israel's right, and brought them close to him. But Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on Ephraim's hand, though he was on the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, thus crossing his hands, although Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph, saying, "The God in whose ways my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who had been my shepherd from my birth to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all harm, bless the lands. In them may my name be recalled, and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they be teeming multitudes upon the earth." When Joseph saw that his father was placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, he thought it was wrong, so he took hold of his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's. "Not so, father," Joseph said to to his father, for the other is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head. But his father objected, saying, I know, my son, I know. He too shall become people, and he too shall be great. Yet his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall be plentiful, enough for nations. So he blessed them that day, saying, by you shall Israel invoke blessings, saying, God made me like Ephraim and Manasseh. Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, I'm about to die, but God will be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers. And now I assign to you one portion more than to your brothers, when I wrested from the Amorites with my sword in battle.
Okay, so here's this story. Joseph brings his sons before Jacob, and the first part of it is when he's actually got his hands on Ephraim and Manasseh, is a blessing to Joseph, right? And it's almost like the boys are, like you put your hand on a Bible type of thing, right? Here he's resting his hands on their head, but blessing Joseph. And it's a strange thing where he's taking them in as his own descendants, so that, and we know that they end up being two of the tribes of Israel, right? So there's a distinction between the sons of Jacob and the tribes of Israel. They don't line up exactly. The two sons that don't get a tribe are Levi. They end up being the ones that are working in the temple, a subgroup of them being the Kohanim, the priests, and Joseph doesn't get his own tribe. There's no, when they go into the land, there's no territory that's for Yosef. Instead, they're Ephraim and Manasseh that take their places. And this is really again, it's a lot of inheritance stuff. So what does this mean? Is that if Joseph's replaced by two, then he gets a double portion, which would normally be reserved for the older child, right? And instead, Joseph's getting a double portion here. And Jacob is seeing that into the future as well by placing, or at least putting his right hand on Ephraim and his left hand on Manasseh, crossing his hands to be able to do that, and to make that blessing, even though Joseph protests. Jacob still says, no, this is the way it's supposed to be. And we, yep.
You think of that moment Jacob was thinking back to the scene with Esau and the trick that he pulled back.
Right, Jacob, he's thinking back to him and Esau. He's thinking back to him placing Joseph above his brothers, and now he's going to do it. He's going to third generation, right? It's like, just continuing it on and on and on.
But there is a difference. Here, we're never given an explanation of why the younger is favored. In the other cases, it's pretty obvious why the younger is a better person to carry on the tradition.
Yeah. Right. We don't necessarily know why. He says, right, that he too shall be a people. His younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall be plentiful enough for a nation. So he's gonna.
Yeah, we don't know why.
We don't know why, but he's gonna be, in some ways, it's the same as the blessing that Rebecca received about Jacob over Esau, right? We don't know why Jacob was picked to be to rule over the older, but it's just
in
the
the
way it was
stories,
given.
you see he's a better person. He's a better choice.
Okay, right.
And
So
we don't see that.
We don't see any of that here, right? But what we do know is that up until today, this is still the blessing that's used for blessing sons, right? May you be like Ephraim and Manasseh. And we keep it in that order, even though that's youngest first and then oldest. And it really is carrying out that, where it says, like, for by you shall Israel invoke blessings, right? And that's really what we continue to do today. The question is why? Right? Why them? When we bless our daughters, we say, may you be like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Right? So the parallel would be, may you be like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So why substitute in Ephraim and Manasseh instead of the patriarchs?
Rabbi,
Yep.
I don't remember the history that well, but the revolt of the 10 tribes against, when they broke away from the tribes of Israel broke away, wasn't that led by Ephraim?
Oh, I don't remember that stuff either.
I don't either. I thought that you had it, the person that led it was an Ephraimite, I'm not sure.
You could be right. You could be right. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
For some reason, that stuck in my head. Maybe I made it up myself.
So one parallel. It could be one parallel that's given between the matriarchs and Ephraim and Manasseh is that these are both groups of people that are raised outside of Canaan. Right? The matriarchs all grow up in Haran, basically, right? And Ephraim and Manasseh, they grow up in Egypt. And so that's one parallel that's given, is here that people who are not embraced in the family, if you will, and yet still are able to in theory or the tradition, are still able to retain their tradition and be good advocates for it and so forth. So that's one reason that's given. Another reason that's given is that we're told, again, we don't have stories to prove this, but that they are the first siblings in the Torah that have a positive relationship. If you go back to all the other siblings, say Cain and Abel, Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, Joseph and his brothers, right? There's all turmoil in all of them, and that we're told that Ephraim and Manasseh have a positive relationship, and so that's a blessing that we want to have for our children and for our people. The Orach Chaim on the handout gives another reason. He says, I'll just read this one. He blessed them on that day, saying, the Torah means that Jacob gave the boys such a full measure of blessings that everybody said that the simplest way to bestow blessings on Jewish children in the future would be to mention that they should be blessed as Ephraim and Manasseh were blessed by Jacob, right? That we want our children to have what they had, right? We want our children to have the same blessings that they received from Jacob. So that's another reason that's given as to why we continue using them within our blessings, the children, when the parents bless the children.
I have two
Yeah,
questions. Why is Rachel's death brought into this?
It's a really great question. I was looking at that and was very puzzled by, not just about why is it brought in. And there's a reason. There's down below it says in the first layer of commentary, Rachel died on his deathbed. Jacob recalls his beloved wife, who died so young and for whom he endured so much. Right. So that's there. But the still question is why? Because he says. Verse 6, progeny born to you after them shall be yours, they shall be recorded instead of their brothers.
That's the other question
Right,
I had too.
And then he goes on, he says, I do this because when I was returning from Padan Aram, Rachel died to my sorrow, right? Like, why is that? And maybe they do this because is more implied and it's from the editor more so than, but it's how the tradition reads this section. Is that he's doing this because of this happening to Rachel, and I'm not sure what the connection is, other than we still have Benjamin, but that he couldn't have more children with her, right? So that maybe that's it. Is that he's saying like because she died young and she died in childbirth with Benjamin, that
two sons.
Well, that we would have thought, just as with Leah, who ended up having 5 sons, right? We would have thought that Rachel would have had more as well, and she didn't. And so, in place of the additional sons that Rachel could have had she not died so young, I'm taking these two in as my own. Maybe that's the connection for it. I'd have to look it up a little bit more. I don't really know. It seems a little, your look, it seems a little tenuous, right?
Right.
But, yeah.
And then there's two descriptions of Jacob being sick, and Joseph, there's the closed passage that we first read.
Right.
And then,
I know, right.
Why is that two separate traditions that they just put together?
Well, that would be interesting. I could look that up and see what the idea is. Are these from different authorship? But I think that it's the first one is just with him and Joseph, and then it comes out as him with Joseph and Menashe and Ephraim. So it's just we can understand that we knew that he was sick, and then somebody else comes to him again and says, "Look, Joseph, it's getting worse, right? Your father's ill, right?" So that's I'm not too overly concerned with that. It's just another way. And now we're going to see again, right, that he gathers all of the other sons together on page 298. Edith, if you want to start. Go ahead.
When there's the great detail in the crossing of the hands,
Yeah.
and so it's not an accident. It's
No.
Isn't he sort of saying without saying, listen, there's some precedent here. Just look at yourself, and I'm not gonna throw it out to you, but
Right, and I see that, that precedent that you're talking about, I see that as an expression of who we are as a people as well, right? That we are always we're the younger, we're the smaller, we're the weaker, right? And yet we're able to be sustained and continue on, and I don't want to say end up ruling over others, but are beating the odds, right? So this idea of the younger supplanting the older is something that we can hold on to in as a people as well. So yeah, I think that idea of precedence and wanting to make a point about
and
it.
if he wanted to say one thing, he could have said, just look in the mirror.
Yeah, right. The book would have been much shorter than
Yes.
this. Yeah, let's look at that. Okay, go ahead, Ian. They had finally polished copper that they used as mirrors. Yeah. So, go ahead, Ian.
Okay. And Jacob called his son and said, "Come together that I may tell you what is to befall you in days to come. Assemble and hearken, a son of Jacob. Hearken to Israel your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and first fruit of my vigor, extending in rank and extending in honor. Unstable as water, you shall excel no longer. For when you mounted your father's bed, you bowed disgrace, my cause he mounted. Simeon and Levi are pairs. Their weapon are a tool of lawlessness. Let not my person be included in their council. Let not my being be counted in their assemble. For when angry they slay men, and when pleased they maim oxen. Cursed be their anger so fierce, and their wrath so relentless. I will divide them in Jacob, scatter them in Israel. You and Judah, your brothers, shall praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your foes. Your father's son shall be Lord to you. Judah is a lion, wealth. On prey, my son, have you grown. He crushed lie down like a lion, like the king of beasts, who there rose him. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet. So that tribute shall come to him, and the homage of peoples be his. He tethers his ass to a vine, his ass full to a choice vine. He washes his garment in wine, his robe in blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, his teeth are whiter than milk.
Okay, so here's the blessings for the first four, Reuven, Simeon and Levi, and Judah. What's interesting is that with Joseph and then Ephraim and Manasseh, it says he blessed them. Right? He blessed Joseph saying this, and then with Ephraim and Manasseh, so he blessed them saying this. Right? Here, when it comes to the other brothers, the other sons, it says, Jacob called his sons and said, "Come together that I may tell you what is to befall you in days to come." We normally think of this as the blessings that he's giving to his sons, but it's really, seems like it's more of a prophecy that he's handing over, right? And not, it's not a blessing in the same, certainly not in the same way, and it's not in a traditional sense of may you be blessed with X, Y, and Z, but rather these are sort of things like, based on who they are as people and his experiences with them so far, this is the way he sees their life carrying on into the future. On the handout, we have a few different texts about this section. Barry, the bottom of page 3, Rashi.
That I may tell you, he wished to reveal to them the end of Israel's exile, but the Shekhinah departed from him, and he began to speak of other
things happening. So, he's got it stuck together. Things, there you go. So this is very similar to what we had before, right? Of that idea of closed, right? And here, but here it doesn't. It says that the Shekhinah, right, was with him and departs, and so he's not able to share this, the imagery, the vision that he was going to, and then instead he goes over to other things, and these are the blessings, right? As I said. And go ahead, continue, Barry.
because of your brother, when you should have received the kingship after Reuben lost it. But a king who is charged with establishing justice cannot be a violent person.
Okay, so this is, if you look on page 300, he's talking to Simeon and Levi, right? And Reuben, right? Reuben sort of lost his status. And so it should have then gone on to Simeon and Levi, but we've seen their violent streak, right? And so they don't get it either, and then eventually that way it drops down to Judah, and we know that from Judah comes the term Jew, and we're all sort of, and we have, the territory of Judah that survived for so long. So this is in some ways looking into the text and seeing how that comes to play. Keep going there, Barry. That's on the same verse. Dad's kinning.
Shimon and Levi are brothers. Their kinship is the use they make of weapons. Yaakov implied that whereas they have displayed their being brothers when avenging the rape of innocent Dinah, their sister, they have failed to do so in their treatment of Joseph, their brother.
Right. So they didn't use the same energies, right, when it came to Joseph as they did with Dinah. Right? Dinah, they took up sword, right? They slaughtered a bunch of people. But with Joseph, they let their brothers, sell them into slavery.
See, now I thought he was angry that they went out and killed people on behalf of Dinah.
Right.
That's how I look at it.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's the simple reading of the text. Here's just another midrashic view on it. Okay, Barry, one more.
People who make use of weaponry in their day-to-day activities are not suitable material for wielding political and military power. Hence, neither of them will be accorded the status taken away from Reuben, where Solomon describes a king's primary characteristic as being
The Mishpat.
Mishpat
Yamad
Yamod Eretz. seeing to it that the rule of law and justice prevails on earth. Shimon and Levi had disqualified themselves from claiming such a distinction.
So if we were doing a session on leadership characteristics and quality, what makes a good leader, this would be included in it, right? That you can't be somebody who's you know, sort of got a violent core,
Puzzles.
right? And so you need to be able to carry out the rule of law and justice prevailing on earth.
Yeah, but doesn't, Jacob refer to his prowess in battle, that he wrested some territory from, he kind of, maybe not in this, when he was talking to Joseph in a previous part of this thing. He talks about how he's giving, part of his inheritance is gonna, or part of the boy's inheritance is gonna be some territory that he wrested with the force of his bow, and I have to go.
Yeah, I'm not sure which one that was.
Being a valiant warrior is not the same as being a violent,
Right,
uncontrolled person.
Oh.
right, yeah, that's a
In
good
other
point.
words, if he did it, it's okay, but if somebody else does it, it's not.
It's the circumstances that make a big difference.
That could be the issue, okay? Good, okay, so the rest of this is a lot of, the blessings or the charges that are gonna be given. I wanna skip on past some of those though, and go to the end of Jacob's life on page 306. We see right at the end of it, actually if you turn back to 305, these were the tribes of Israel, 12 in number, and this is what their father said to them as he bade them farewell, addressing to each a parting word appropriate to him. Then he instructed them, saying, I am about to be gathered to my kin, bury me with my fathers in the cave which is in the field of Ephron the Hittite. So he's asking the same thing or he's asking this, and that we're going to see Joseph ask again later on. The cave which is in the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre in the land of Canaan, the field that Abraham brought from Ephron the Hittite for a burial site. There Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried, there Isaac and his wife Rebekah were buried, and there I buried Leah, the field with the cave in it, bought from the Hittites. When Jacob finished his instruction to his sons, he drew his feet into the bed, and breathing his last, he was gathered to his people. And so we see here the end of his life. And so we have one more text there in the on the handout, which looks at the next chapter, which talks about Jacob being embalmed, right? Because if he's going to be transported this long distance, there needs to be some sort of preparation. And the rabbis talk about it. It's maybe not embalming in the same that we think about it, but it said stuff about how they would take out the fluids and put in spices. They would use things to keep from smelling too much. We sit back and we're like, but Jews, right? We don't do embalming, right? That's the first question that people ask about it. And the Or HaChaim looks at that and says, it's also possible that Joseph was unaware of these secrets when he ordered his father to be embalmed. So while we have a tradition and understanding that the patriarchs knew the Torah, knew the mitzvot, that's a rabbinic understanding, maybe they didn't have a complete understanding of all of them when he has his father embalmed there. I want to look at one more thing, and this is going back to the beginning where Jacob calls his sons together. Come that I may tell you what is to befall you in the days to come. So if you turn the page, this is a translation of that little Hebrew text. In the preface to Sefer Pri L'Tzadik by Ad Morat Tzadok HaKohen, regarding what is said in Pirkei Avot, do not become attached to the wicked. Right, so that's a text in Pirkei Avot. Right, don't be connected to the wicked. And in Avot de Rabbi Natan, which is sort of a commentary on Pirkei Avot, we add, even for Torah, that in these matters they have said only regarding an individual that joins with wicked person, since they might learn from their ways, which is not so for a whole community. So one thing is, when it's saying, don't become attached to the wicked, he's saying, individuals, right? You, and don't go out and sort of rub elbows, become friends with somebody who's wicked. But when we're talking about the community, maybe it's a little bit different, because the community, a community of good people in relationship to wicked people, right, maybe has more strength and ability to turn them, right? If it's just you and somebody else, you are more likely to follow their ways. Whereas here, we've got your community able to bring people over. And then it continues, the God of Jacob, the favorite of the son, I think it's supposed to be sons of Israel, for of the wicked God says, what is it that you tell them of my laws? However, on the matter of commandments, one is permitted to join with them, or even the sinners of Israel are filled with mitzvot like a pomegranate. So, when I was reading this, I was thinking of some of the modern struggles that we have in terms of sort of coalition building, right? And who do we allow ourselves to be partners with to achieve the goals that we want to achieve? And it comes up. It's come up several times with some of the organizations like Black Lives Matter or the Women's March, where some of the people that are involved in it have said some, some anti-Semitic things against Jews, right? But is there some time where we can also say, look, we need to partner with them because there's other goals that we want to achieve, right? There's other mitzvot that we want to fulfill, and that are even though we might see some of their actions as wicked, right, as rasha, maybe there's other things where they've got strengths that we can bind together with it. I sort of saw that within this. I wanted to bring it out because I think it's a struggle that we have in dealing with some of these coalitions that we try to put together. We could certainly look at it in and I don't want to, using the term wicked is sometimes harsh, but people that do things that are not the way that we would normally go, do we still attach ourselves to them when it serves our purpose, right? When we want to do something else very positive, right? I mean, you can think about even in the Israeli government structure, right? Where in order to form a coalition, right? No matter who it's going to be after the third election, no matter who it's going to be, they're going to have to connect with parties that they don't agree with all the time, right?
The Arabs have a saying for it too. What is it? The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Okay.
That sometimes you have to compromise
in order to achieve something of goodness and greatness. So I saw this when I was learning the other day and thought it's an interesting thing for us to be thinking about in the struggle that we might have. So. Very good. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
That was good.
Yeah.